My pleasure to introduce the next panel on the latest on the legal proceedings. And just like every other module you'll see, the A-team is involved with this. So we really have the experts that have been kind of living this whole legal proceedings over the years. We have a couple of folks, you see the empty chairs, that are actually in a concurrent session that will be joining us in progress. So we may be interrupted for that, but we'll see. So Robert Haefele is going to be the moderator of this panel. And joining him, we've got Duke is with us, Duke Maloney from Kreindler. And we have Terry Strada, who I think a lot of us have seen on TV lately, Terry, with 9/11 Families United. And I feel, when I kicked off the session, I mentioned there was a press conference going on in the other room. Well, Terry was one of the folks speaking with the press, and the attorneys were in the room, and also Brett Eagleson, who will be joining us. He's a family member and also the president of 9/11 Justice. But boy, oh boy, Terry, congratulations on they laid out, connecting the dots, absolutely fact after fact after fact between what happened on 9/11 and Saudi Arabia. And it was just so impressive, and I was proud to kind of be part of watching that play out. So Robert, let me turn it over to you, and I think this will be a real interesting and informative session. So let's welcome him.
Thank you, Frank. And thanks to Mary and Stephanie and Jason, everybody, the entire team at the symposium has been fantastic, and year after year, you managed to put on a really great program, and I thank you once again. As was said by Frank, I'm Robert Haefele from Motley, representing the plaintiffs in the 9/11 litigation, and also serve as liaison counsel for the MDL 1570 executive committee that coordinates the litigation for the plaintiffs. And as Frank said, we have a terrific panel. We have John Eubanks, who's coming in remotely with us, and he's going to address, in addition to just being a panel member, he's also going to address, if you have questions later on about the US VSST, he's my guy of resource for that. And Andrew Maloney from Kreindler, Terry Strada from 9/11 Families United, and on the end we have Claude Rains, star of the Invisible Man series from 1933. And as Frank said, we have two more panel members, Gavin Simpson and Brett Eagleson, that will be here joining us. As in past years, we're not aiming to cover every single issue that happened over the past year, but a handful of important issues that we're going to highlight. A word of caution, today we're not going to address any case-specific issues. If you have questions, I'm going to ask you to refer those to your own lawyer. Also, we've not included a lot about Iran, unless John's going to contradict me on that. We haven't built in information regarding the US VSST, unless, again, John has something to say about that. But largely, we have three particular issues over this past year that are up on the screen of the bulleted points. They're the status of the litigation against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which probably everybody's here most interested to hear about. The recent decision where the court just a few weeks ago denied the Kingdom's fourth attempt to get out of the case. And then also the court issued simultaneously a decision on some Daubert motions, or the motions to strike or limit experts. The second issue is the status of the litigation against Sudan. Sudan's multiple unsuccessful attempts to appeal its defaults and its answers, and the status of the merits discovery against Sudan. And then thirdly, the status of the appeal of the final judgments against Dubai Islamic Bank, which is now underway. And finally, a few comments about additional filings to make public evidence that's previously been filed under seal. Looking first to the Saudi proceedings. For those of you who are in the room, can I just ask you to raise your hand if you're plaintiffs in the 9/11 litigation with claims against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia?
Somebody's been drinking my water.
And I'll look around the room, you're all winners. At least for the moment, you can celebrate.
Yes, you can.
You can celebrate a win in the court's August 28th decision denying the Kingdom's fourth attempt to get out of the case. Clearly, that's the most important thing that we're here. That's the most important news. That's the subject of our panel discussion a little bit later on. So I'm not going to say much about it other than the fact that the arguments were heard in front of the court. The evidence was presented to the court July 31st of 2024. And just a bit over a year later, after looking at all that evidence that was presented to the court, the district court issued a decision August 28th, 2025 that denied the Kingdom's motion. And again, we're going to circle back and talk about that decision a little bit more at the panel. A related issue concerned the motions to limit the expert testimony or Daubert decisions in the context of the Kingdom's motion to dismiss, and whether the issue for those experts had to do all about whether the court had jurisdiction. And now that the court has determined that it has, the question really comes to whether or not the court's decision about the Daubert motions matters all that much. But the magistrate judge issued a decision in December 2024, shortly after we were here last time, that fully excluded one of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's primary experts, limited two of its other experts, excluded two of the plaintiff's experts, and limited two of the plaintiff's other experts. On August 28th, the same day as the court's decision here, the district court basically affirmed the earlier magistrate judge decision about those experts. So the status right now is what the judge has what the judge now has decided is essentially what the magistrate judge had decided back in December. Both judges also added that even without the expert's testimony, the parties could rely on the evidence that was underlying those opinions. So even if the judge had stricken the expert's expert report and testimony, to the extent that the evidence was still there, it was all still available for the court to consider and for the plaintiffs to argue in court. In the cases with claims against Sudan, after being absent for decades, Sudan appeared and filed motions to dismiss. It lost those motions in August of 2023 and filed an interlocutory appeal that we claimed was improper, and we filed a motion, and that appeal was dismissed in September 2024 last year, just before we were here last year. And after losing in the appellate court, Sudan was obligated to file answers and initially defaulted again. We raised that to the court. Eventually, the court allowed them to answer, and they answered. And we've been in we've been in merits discovery with Sudan since then. They've made additional efforts to try and get out, and they've lost all of those efforts. We served interrogatories or written questions for them to answer. And essentially, most of the issues that were addressed in the written discovery was, where do you think the documents are? What's the status of your retention of those documents? Where can we find them? And what's the buildings that they're in? Tell us what the status of those in. Essentially, the government of Sudan came back and said, in 2023, given the unrest that's going on in Sudan, every single building that housed any document that would be relevant to this litigation was completely destroyed. We have no documents to give you. So document discovery is essentially done for that, at least for Sudan. We're in discovery trying to set up right now depositions. We've given the court a protocol. There's a few disputes about whether what terms of that protocol, and the court will make those decisions. And we've also served discovery. We've also served discovery on the United States government, the different entities of the United States government. That's John. I see John's face down there. I'm being told this is up there, but
Maybe we could switch it, because it's probably better for you to,
yeah, that might actually be good if I could see it
is it
here.
possible to switch the screens?
Although John's a
Looks so
good-looking guy.
funny with-
You can leave John up.
No, but
So anyway, so we've started subpoenas on these United States government agencies, and we're in negotiation with them to try and see what we can get. But as in the past,
I think
we know that that's a long
last year it was always
process.
here.
So the
That-
current
that-
status is that we're working the U.S. government to get documents from them, and we are working with the court to try and get a protocol to do depositions of Sudanese witnesses. The last issue this past year is regarding Dubai Islamic Bank, and I'll be quick about this. The court granted DIB summary judgment in 2025, entered final judgment in July of 2024, I think it was, entered final judgment in January 2025, entered a final judgment that's necessary to appeal, and in early 2025, all the plaintiffs who had claims against DIB filed a notice of appeal, and opening briefs were filed in July, and Dubai Islamic Bank's briefs are due next month in October. So the last issue before we turn to what everybody came here for, I wanted to add a word about what was done this year to work towards public access to information. As we've mentioned here before throughout this litigation, much of the litigation has happened through documents that have been filed under seal. In December 2025, we filed on the public docket all the papers that were part of the DIB motion for summary judgment issues, and so those documents are now available on the public docket. And similarly, in February 2025, we submitted 11 DVDs and filed on the public docket multiple filings that sought to make public as much as possible what we could in the back and forth on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's motion to dismiss. So most of those documents that had been filed under seal are now available for public download. Finally, in May and June, we gave the court a 1 terabyte hard drive and another DVD with additional data that we received in 2025 from the United Kingdom's Metropolitan Police, which is more material that the MPS turned over to us responsive to our request for them in the litigation. So I'm going to blow through a few slides quickly to get to the discussion. One point I wanted to make mostly as a reminder is about one of the men who plays prominently in the court's decision. And I showed you this document last year, but this is a reminder that in 2017, the FBI report, in an FBI report, they assessed that Omar al-Bayoumi was a Saudi spy working for the Saudi GIP, or their intelligence people, and who was reporting to then Saudi Ambassador Prince Bandar. And as we progress through the slides in our presentation, in our discussion, we're going to see a few items of evidence that we now know the UK authorities seized in a raid of Bayoumi's home in the days after 9/11. The UK authorities, at the United States government's instigation, raided Bayoumi's home, seized evidence, detained Bayoumi for questioning. 3 items that were turned over to us in discovery from the MPS, not by the FBI, but by the MPS, are, and these are things that we're going to talk about in the discussion, a welcoming party video of a party Bayoumi threw for 2 of the hijackers, a Capitol casing video showing Bayoumi in 1999 conducting what experts say is a casing of the U.S. Capitol, and on the same video there's 2 images showing Bayoumi with 2 other Saudi government officials. Incidentally, one of the officials who's in the video expressed in his deposition about 24 times that he didn't know Bayoumi. And finally, an airplane sketch that the court agrees suggests Bayoumi had some witting involvement in 9/11. And we're going to discuss each of these. So at this point, we're going to switch gears and engage our esteemed panel members. And hopefully we can have the 2 additional ones who will join us shortly. What I want to do, I'm going to skip through a few slides here. Terry, I'm going to start with a few questions for you, and just to be clear, let's flip back because it's not actually about the pictures that are up there. First, thanks, Terry, for joining us. I want to turn to you first to actually address a few quick questions before we launch into some of the other areas that may take more time. In years past, Terry, you've advocated for the Justice Against Sponsored Terrorism Act, or JASTA, which Congress enacted in September 2016, so happy almost 9th birthday for JASTA. And it played prominently in the court's decision recently. More recently, you were here the last 2 years, and I think it was, and you spoke about what I'd term a technical fix bill called the Ensuring Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act, or EJVTA. And we can talk more on the back end if people have questions about what EJVTA is. But what I want to know is, can you tell us, Terry, what's the status of the EJVTA currently?
Yes, so we did not get out of committee in the last Congress, but we were able to bring Tom Cotton to the floor and explain his reasons for being against the EJVTA, which was good for us. So we now know his position publicly. We will bring the bill back, hopefully this Congress, and it will have the same support it had in the past, and we will let everybody know when that happens and what we might need from you next.
Thanks, Terry. And this one's for you, too. Just this past weekend, an article came out in the Sunday Times in London that quotes you, and a central part of that article uncovers that the London authorities had Bayoumi in custody for 7 days. They thought that he should be extradited to the United States, but ultimately they released him because the U.S. authorities didn't give the U.K. authorities incriminating evidence about Bayoumi that we know that the FBI had, because the U.S. authorities told their U.K. counterparts to release Bayoumi. And first off, is that sort of encapsulate the summary of that?
Oh, absolutely, yes, yes.
And with the recent news about the court's decision and the evidence presented in court in July 2024, and perhaps even more because of the London Times article this past weekend, do you have in mind steps that might be taken to foster better cooperation from our own government, and maybe more specifically transparency?
Yes, so I am currently drafting a petition to the FBI for full transparency on September 11th and all of the evidence that they've had and that they've kept from us. A big problem with the FBI is that they have not cooperated. So I will draft the petition, and some way, somehow, we will get it out to all of the families. And I encourage everyone to, when you open it up, to sign on as fast as you can. We will collect the signatures, and I will personally take it to FBI headquarters and hand it in on all of our behalfs.
So bottom of the line, we should stay tuned to hear more about that.
Yes.
All right. Now, in UK's Parliament on Monday, members of Parliament engaged in what I'd say is a spirited discussion about Bayoumi's involvement with Saudi intelligence services and his links to the hijackers and the Saudi government's role in the lead up to the attacks. During the comments, one member of the Parliament asked for a full investigation by the UK's Intelligence and Security Committee. And another one asked a whole series of questions that probed into the issues around that. My first question of three here, I'm going to ask you. Do you have any view about the fact that members of Parliament are now asking serious questions about Bayoumi's and Saudi's role in the 9/11, and how does that compare to questions being asked in the public dialogue by our own government?
What public dialogue from our own government? We have heard nothing. And like Bob is saying, the UK Parliament held an emergency session to address these issues as soon as it became public a week ago, or last Sunday. God, it hasn't even been a week. And our government has been silent.
Are there questions analogous to what are being asked in the UK that you'd like to see our public officials raising?
Absolutely. What happened to the evidence? Who was in control of it? Where did it go? We want to know everything we can about it.
Okay. given that the U.S. government has already conducted an inquiry into 9/11 through its 9/11 Commission, and given that much of the key evidence now being considered was not disclosed until it was uncovered through this litigation that we're here about today, the MDL 1570 litigation, the civil litigation in federal court in New York, isn't there something to be said about encouraging the civil litigation to reach answers versus only pushing for some additional investigation by political policymakers?
Absolutely. The civil litigation is the only reason we have the evidence that we do have now, that everyone's going to be talking about, that is so intensely important. We didn't get it any other way. We didn't get it from a commission before. I have no faith we would get it from any other commission set up like that. The civil litigation is the reason why we are seeing what we're seeing, and that is very important.
Thanks.
Can I just add something to that?
Yeah, please.
I just came from the Sufan Center on Counterterrorism. It's over at the Perlman Center. And Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut appeared by video and addressed the audience. The audience is primarily FBI, former FBI, CIA, International Counterterrorism Intelligence Group. And they all had different presentations, but Senator Blumenthal appeared asking the exact same questions that Terry just addressed and that the UK MPs were addressing. And he is working with John Cornyn, a Republican from Texas, to ask those same questions. What happened to this evidence? Why wasn't it disclosed earlier? He wants to have a congressional inquiry on this, and he's calling for just that and in a bipartisan way. So that was just this morning.
So that's great. And I think, Terry and Duke, I think it's important to recognize what I think Duke's pointing out. There are a handful of public officials who have been asking questions over the years, who have been instrumental in pushing some of the dialogue and some of the issues of the 9/11 families into the investigation. And I think Senator Blumenthal is one, and Senator Cornyn is one who have been instrumental in pushing some of the legislation like JASTA and like the EGVTA. So I guess it's important, Duke, that you raise a good point, that there are folks that have been on our side. By and large, the harsher questions about what happened really have gone in a sleepy way unaddressed over the years, right? Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, and I should also note that Kash Patel, the current director of the FBI, is supposed to testify before Congress next week. And the media scuttlebutt is they want to drill him on the Epstein material. It's a political football, obviously, but we want members of Congress to ask about the 9/11 investigation and the shortcomings from the FBI and the CIA in the way they handled this evidence.
Yeah, and I should emphasize that when I asked Terry the question, it was really about that it shouldn't be only a redo on the 9/11 Commission. It shouldn't be only public officials doing something in Congress, but absolutely they should be asking the question and they should be investigating the issues and uncovering what they can about it. But I think another important point that can't be lost is the fact that the litigation has uncovered things that have never been uncovered before and in fact have been intentionally not uncovered. Would you agree, Duke?
Yeah, the question I've always had for years was whether or not this was FBI incompetence or an intentional effort to secrete the evidence. It looks more and more like somebody didn't want them to look at Saudi Arabia, and we've thought that was a possibility for many years. How this plays out is going to be very important. Our mission as lawyers, however, isn't really to bash the FBI. That's not going to help us. We want them to help all of us from this point forward. Now that the cat's out of the bag and there's an avalanche of evidence that we have and more coming, and we're going to get into that in a few minutes, now is the time for them to help the families rather than be a roadblock for the families. So bashing the FBI is the media's job, and maybe some of you, but my job is to win the case against Saudi Arabia. I think that's what we really want, and we want their help. It's embarrassing what we've uncovered is embarrassing to many in the intelligence community, and some of them didn't know about it, some of them probably did, I don't know. But my point, and I think the point for the lawyers, is we need to keep moving forward and prove our case against Saudi Arabia.
Absolutely, and I'm not advocating to bash the FBI. We are pointing out the fact that they did withhold this evidence, and it was purposely done. And we are talking about past FBIs, and I agree. We need Kash Patel to look at this now closely and be an ally of ours, and I think that's the road that we've taken with Director Patel in the correspondence that we're sending into his office, and that is the hope that this FBI will cooperate and take a look at what happened to us in the past and not continue with that misconduct, because there is going to be more discovery and there will be more asked of them. So removing the roadblocks that have existed is something that he can do for us, and I hope he does. And I do hope now that, like you said, the cat's out of the bag, all of the great work that you've done in exposing all of this, that this Congress and that these members will be more successful, because we have gone to them in the past, and they have gone to IGs in the past, those are Inspector Generals, and asked for them to look into these matters very closely, and we've gotten nothing. So the petition, I hope, will be a strong voice. When we're united, we're very strong, that we all care about this very much. And that's really what the petition will say, that we need this.
Thanks, Terry. So let's turn next to the decision that's on everybody's mind, and I have some questions to discuss about Judge Daniels' August 28th decision that denied the Kingdom's motion. By way of simple introduction, I would characterize this decision as one of the most consequential decisions so far in the In re terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001 litigation. Let this sink in for a moment. The United States federal judge has taken a year to study a huge trove of evidence. The evidence included evidence that the FBI never analyzed, that it hid from the 9/11 Commission, that it never circulated to other elements within the FBI that were investigating the very issue that the evidence touched on. And it was discovered only in this litigation. After taking years to study that evidence, the U.S. federal judge held that the plaintiffs in the case deserved to have their day in court against Saudi Arabia because, and this is very important, there is credible evidence that the Saudi government was complicit. They had a direct role in 9/11, and the Saudi government's attempts to explain away that evidence were contradictory and not credible. That needs to sink in. The federal court made that finding. Now, on the screen are images of two of the central actors identified as Saudi agents that are discussed in the court's decision, and they're on the left, Fahad al-Thamari, and on the right, Omar Bayoumi, who we have heard some about already. Now, Duke, can you summarize who Thamari is and tell us anything else you think we need to know
Before
about?
I do that, I just want to add to what Bob just said. This is the very first time this decision by Judge Daniels 2 weeks ago is the very first time that a U.S. court has exercised jurisdiction over a foreign sovereign for its material support of terrorism who was not listed on the state sponsor of terrorism list. Up until 2016, you could only sue countries that were listed in the U.S. State Department's list of state sponsors of terrorism. Saudi Arabia was not on that list, has never been on that list. JASTA was a game changer because it allowed us to bring the suit directly against Saudi Arabia, even though they weren't on any terror list. And the decision last week was the very first time that a court has said, I'm going to exercise jurisdiction over Saudi Arabia, or over any country. Previously, Saudi Arabia had been successful in getting litigation dismissed, not just in this case, but in the Pensacola shooting and some others, and other countries as well. So this is a pretty significant, historic, landmark decision. The Saudis have already filed a notice of appeal, as we expected that they would do, and they'll probably ask for a stay of the litigation, which we're going to object to, but it's a significant holding. And the holding, which basically says we're exercising jurisdiction here in the United States and that the plaintiffs get a right to a trial, is just the tip of the iceberg. The decision said so much more. We're going to cover some of that in the slides that I prepared for you to see. I guess my first question is, how many of you were able to attend the oral argument last July in the Southern District? So you know firsthand, having seen some of what we showed, some of this will be familiar to you. How many in the room have actually read Judge Daniels' decision that came out 2 weeks ago?
Most of it.
So The first 32 pages are kind of complex legal issues that the court had to deal with that are very important to the case, and I'll cover some of that. But starting at around page 33, for those of you who haven't read it, I would just start at page 33 to the end. It's a 45-page decision. It goes through the evidence, and Judge Daniels makes some very specific findings that we were very, very happy to see. So this isn't just a win on defeating a motion to dismiss. You may have seen some media coverage. There's been very, very few quotes from the Kellogg firm. They're the lawyers for Saudi Arabia, and they keep just saying either no comment or this is only a finding on jurisdiction. It's not a finding that we did it. I beg to differ because some of the language that the judge used in his decision, I think, spell the writing on the wall for Saudi Arabia. I'm going to go through some of that now. Bob asked me to discuss these two guys. I think they're somewhat familiar to you. They were both identified early on in the investigation. The 9/11 Commission wrote about these two in the book, and there's substantial information about them even before we started this case. But we uncovered a lot more during our civil discovery. So Fahd Thumeiri came to the United States in the mid-1990s, a Saudi imam. He had diplomatic credentials. He had a visa saying that he was working in the Saudi embassy or consulate. And after 9/11, he was interviewed, and he told the FBI that, in fact, he worked at the consulate, and that's why he had diplomatic credentials. He lied. It was later discovered in our litigation that he was never an employee, he was never employed at the Saudi consulate in LA or the Saudi embassy. They gave him diplomatic cover so he could carry on his propagation of the virulent version of Wahhabi Islam at the King Fahd Mosque in Los Angeles. That mosque was fully funded by Saudi Arabia, and he was the imam there preaching to other Saudi citizens and, in fact, Saudi jihadists. So he's a central focus early on in the investigation of 9/11. He denied knowing Bayoumi, he denied knowing Alaki, he denied knowing anybody, basically playing dumb. When we took his deposition, I don't know how many times he said, "I don't recall." But it was clear that he lied to the investigators early on.
And one important point is no matter how you slice what his lies were, no matter what hat he was wearing, in all the circumstances, he was somebody who was working for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, he was on the Saudi payroll. He was getting compensated by the government of Saudi Arabia. We found correspondence where he was actually employed by the Ministry of Islamic Affairs. That's where most of the bad guys are, the Ministry of Islamic Affairs. Sometimes you see that MOIA, the acronym for that ministry. That's part of the government. There is no separation of church and state in Saudi Arabia. They are a key part of the Saudi government. So that ministry is the one that employed people, not just in Saudi Arabia, but around the world. They had offices at every embassy, including the United States, and consulate. Fahd Thumeiri his mission was to work for the Ministry of Islamic Affairs to propagate Islam, Wahhabi Islam. We recovered correspondence where the ministry appointed him to be the supervisor of all the propagators in the state of California during this time period in the late 1990s. That's pretty significant because he's now a supervisor and in a managerial role, and he is somebody who is in constant contact with religious propagators from Saudi Arabia in California.
So in the court's decision, the court had a bit to say about both Bayoumi and Thumeiri, and some of it is summarized in some selections that you provided to me to go through, and they're up on the screen now. And can you explain to us or summarize the key points?
Yeah, before we do that, you saw the picture of Omar al-Bayoumi. I'm sure that's a name familiar to most of you. His lawyers, the Kellogg firm, denied that he was employed by Saudi Arabia. So one of the things that we sought to investigate and prove was that he was actually being paid by and employed by the state of Saudi Arabia. So that was there was no dispute that Thumeiri was employed by Saudi Arabia, but Kellogg disputed Bayoumi was an employee of Saudi Arabia, and we uncovered lots of facts to prove that he was in fact employed by Saudi Arabia starting in 1994 when he arrived in the United States through the 9/11 attacks.
I think interestingly, even the company that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia said was actually his employee came into court and said, no, he was an employee of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, not ours.
Yeah, they used a cutout. The Saudis used a cutout, an aviation company, to give his paychecks to Bayoumi on a regular basis for many, many, many years while he was living in San Diego. He was here ostensibly pretending to be a student pursuing degrees. He was in his mid-30s by then. But as the FBI indicated, he wasn't going to class, he wasn't going to work. What he was doing was setting up a reception committee, a cell of jihad supporters for Al-Qaeda.
So getting back to, you give me some quotes from the decision that you wanted to talk about related to Bayoumi and Thumari.
Yeah, so before I get to some of these quotes, our mission, Judge Daniels in 2018 narrowly tailored our ability to get discovery so that he could exercise jurisdiction. And what he really wanted to know was, number one, were these two guys, Thumari and Bayoumi, employed by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? Number two, did they provide material support to the hijackers, knowing that they were Al-Qaeda or that they were up to no good? And finally, were they doing that within the scope of their employment at the behest of the Saudi government? So those were the key things we needed to prove and investigate. So I did cover some of this last year when I was here based on the oral argument that took place, but now what you're going to see on the screen are quotes from the court, the judge himself. That's significant. So the judge found that there were frequent that Bayoumi and Thumari had frequent interactions with the hijackers, and they met the hijackers at the mosque in Los Angeles, the King Fahd Mosque, the Saudi mosque. They were both important logistical events for the hijackers' settlement to the United States. As soon as they got off the plane from Bangkok, they went straight to the King Fahd Mosque in Los Angeles. That's not a coincidence. The judge found that Thumari and Bayoumi were working together, coordinating with the Saudi government and when providing assistance. The basis for that were the phone calls between the two of them. Even though Thumari denied knowing Bayoumi, there were, I think, something like 40 phone calls. We had phone records. Of course, Mr. Kellogg argued, we don't know what was said during the phone calls, but the time of those phone calls were taking place was right before the hijackers arrived and then during the hijackers' stay in Southern California. And it also contradicted Thumari, who said he didn't know Bayoumi. And Bayoumi, when he was deposed, said, oh yeah, I know Thumari, and I've been to that mosque in LA many times. So there was a lot of contradictory testimony between the two of them. They couldn't get their story straight.
The issue of whether there was a support network for the two early arriving hijackers, Hazmi and Midar, was a subject of discussion at the July 31st hearing. It was pretty hotly contested, and the phrase support network appears at least 14 times in the arguments discussed by the lawyers for both sides. And the lawyers representing Saudi Arabia pointed to plaintiff's evidence and argued that there was no evidence that Bayoumi and Thumari were responsible for orchestrating the support network for the two early arriving hijackers in Southern California. In the August 28th decision, what did the court have to say about the assertion, and what evidence did the court point to? And I would underscore that it seems that the court necessarily, it doesn't appear to have used the phrase support network in the decision, but nonetheless does underscore the fact that there was a lot of support from a variety of people that were underneath Bayoumi and Thumari's.
Yeah, so even as far back as the 9/11 Commission in 2004, and every intelligence agent and counterterrorism agent would tell you that typically you don't send your operatives into a foreign country where they don't speak English without a support network, a soft landing to greet them and take care of them while they were there. So the 9/11 Commission suspected that there was a support network in Southern California, but that's as far as they went. They identified Thumari and Bayoumi as potential suspects, but they never really pursued that investigation to the end like we have done. So I don't think anybody's ever disputed that a support network in Southern California and other parts of the country likely existed. But of course, Mr. Kellogg and Saudi Arabia denied that these two guys were part of that support network. we've uncovered a lot of evidence to show that they were actually the focus of that support network and supervising that support network. And so there were facts that were undisputed, and the court commented on those in his decision. And there were some facts that were disputed, but the evidence was in our favor because the dispute by Saudi Arabia really didn't carry any water. And I'm going to go through some of that in a moment. But the judge looked at both undisputed facts and disputed facts where there was very good evidence on our side and no good explanation on Saudi Arabia's side. So if you go back to that slide.
Yeah.
So there were some general statements made by the court that Bayoumi was a connecting point between the hijackers, and the court identified only some of the evidence that we presented. There was a lot of evidence that's not discussed in Judge Daniels' decision. There's just so much of it. He only needed to really focus on some of the stuff that was either undisputed, or if it was disputed, that we have the overwhelming explanation for it. And that's important because when the Saudis try to appeal this case, the Court of Appeals will take a look at what the judge considered, what he didn't consider, what he was neutral on, what he rejected. And he took 13 months to write a very careful decision, knowing it was going to be going up on an immediate appeal. And we think he did a very good job of doing that. So the judge pointed out some examples. Bayoumi knew Thumari personally and frequented the mosque where the hijackers first arrived. I discussed that in a minute. You can see the quote. That's from the court. That's not from me. Bayoumi in San Diego knew Anwar al-Awlaki, an al-Qaeda recruiter who moved from Southern California with the hijackers to Virginia to meet the additional incoming hijackers. That's not a coincidence. And eventually, after 9/11, there was an arrest warrant for him. He fled the country. He was an al-Qaeda recruiter online, very effective recruiter. And he went back to his ancestral homeland. He was born in the United States. And he was in Yemen, and the Obama administration targeted him and took him out in a drone strike. So he's a significant player, and Judge Daniels knew all about al-Awlaki and thought that that was a significant contact point for Bayoumi, and he mentioned that in his decision, and that also al-Awlaki visited the Parkwood apartments where Bayoumi lived and where Bayoumi got an apartment for the hijackers.
So I mentioned earlier that there was a video of a welcoming party that Bayoumi threw for two of the hijackers, Hazmi and Midar. In this slide here, is this a picture from that?
Yeah, so some of you may have seen this before. Some of this has been on television. We played this at the oral argument last year. Some of this video was available to the 9/11 Commission from the FBI, but it's unclear to us if the version that they saw was a complete version, because when it was eventually produced to us from the FBI several years ago, they only gave us a very condensed version, a highly edited version, which we thought was unusual. We were able to file with the court a request for judicial assistance from the MPS, Scotland Yard in the UK. Gavin Simpson from our firm went over there. He's a Scottish lawyer and former prosecutor from The Hague, and he had some connections there and was able to convince them to reveal a trove of documents to us, one of which was the full video. We call this the welcome video for the hijackers. And it is discussed briefly in the 9/11 Commission report from 2004, but the 9/11 Commission either didn't evaluate it extensively or didn't have a version that we were able to get. In fact, they said that the two hijackers don't really appear on the video. They were secreted in the back bedroom and not part of this party at all. Nothing could be further from the truth. The hijackers were in this room. First of all, this is at the hijackers' apartment. You can see there's no furniture there. They had just moved in. And Bayoumi put together a welcome party of various like-minded thinkers in the Islamic community in San Diego to come and meet the two hijackers. So this is Bayoumi saying that we are welcoming the brothers, in fact, whom we have not had the pleasure of meeting. The people in this room all knew each other and knew Bayoumi. Who they had not met was Hazmi and Midar, the first two hijackers to come to the United States. If you go to the next slide. That's Bayoumi, and he's asking everybody in the room to introduce themselves to the hijackers. That's Khalid Bidhar. He's one of the hijackers from American Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. This is his apartment. This is at that party. He's actually preparing food that he serves to some of these senior religious officials that are in that room. And Hazmi is sitting next to Bayumi's son in the room. One of the things that the 9/11 Commission said was they were only able to identify 5 people in the room. Well, we identified all 29 of them, if you go to the next slide. So we put together, through a lot of investigative effort and work, and digital zooming in and still photography, we were able to identify, as I think everybody knows, we have former FBI agents and the JTTF, NYPD agents that worked on this case, and they went out and they started doing additional investigation and interviews. We were able to identify each member, each person who was in that room who were there for one very specific reason, not just to welcome the hijackers, but to provide the extended support network for the hijackers. Various people in this room ended up helping them get driver's licenses, getting them flight lessons, money transfers that came over from Al-Qaeda. There's a significant person here, number 14, Sheikh Mohammed Al-Qahtani. He's a Saudi government official, and Saudi Arabia to this day claims they don't know who he is, but he's a Ministry of Islamic Affairs. We, during discovery, asked Saudi Arabia for information about any Saudi government official that had any contact with the hijackers, any documents. They gave us next to nothing. They didn't know. We found out about this from the video. They had no explanation for it, and to this day, they claim they don't know who that person is.
Duke, I'm looking at the slide, and I'm noticing that in this welcoming party, this party that's being thrown, the person who's essentially hosting it is number 1, Mr. Al-Bayoumi, right?
Yes, he's standing up.
And the person who usually is the centerpiece for a party would stand next to the host, correct?
Yes, and you see number 22 is standing right behind him. Khalid Al-Midar is standing behind him. And
then who's number 26?
26 is Bayumi's son, Imad, his teenage son. And sitting right next to him is Nawaf al-Hazmi, the other hijacker from American Flight 77. And the one that says 21, that's Osama. He's the American-born Islamic convert that was holding the video camera. He was told on the video not to film the left side of the room, but by accident, when he was moving around, he did in fact film the left side of the room. When I say he was told that actually appears on the tape. I didn't show you the whole video. And we deposed Osama. He's actually an American. Last name is Dyson. He's also the guy that accompanied Bayoumi to Los Angeles when they had the chance meeting of the hijackers at the Mediterranean Cafe when they first arrived. So there's 2 other guys. It's not limited just to these 2 guys, but these 2 other guys, Sadan and Suderi, were also Saudi employees. They were Ministry of Islamic Affairs propagators. They visited the United States in 1998 and early 1999 to Southern California, and they essentially met with the very people that the hijackers would later meet. They wanted to assure and be convinced that this was the proper soft landing for the Al-Qaeda hijackers. So Sadan and Suderi went to the King Fahd Mosque in Los Angeles, met with Thumeri. They went to San Diego, met with Bayoumi. Interestingly, Bayoumi and Thumeri claimed they barely knew those 2 guys, that they only met them the one time. They were here for Ramadan. But Sadan and Suderi have known contacts with Al-Qaeda. They eventually left the United States and came back as diplomatic officials for Saudi Arabia, and they were supposed to be assigned to the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C. Neither of them actually worked there. In fact, they left Washington and went to the Midwest, where some of the hijackers would later attempt to take flight lessons, and where some of the hijackers, when they were driving cross country from Southern California and Arizona, would stop along the way to make sure that the plan was in effect. So Sadan and Suderi are what we would call managerial officials for Saudi Arabia. They had diplomatic credentials. There's no doubt that they were employed and paid by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They met with Thumeri. They met with Bayoumi. We don't have direct evidence they met with the hijackers, but there's a lot of good circumstantial evidence that they did meet with them while they were driving cross country.
And one of the items that was seized from Bayumi's home was a video that had this trip showing Bayumi and showing Bayumi together with Sudan and Suderi in touring Washington, D.C., right?
Yeah, despite Bayumi's denials at his deposition of not knowing Sudan Suderi, we later got from Scott.
And by the way, their denials of not knowing him well or not knowing him at all in their depositions.
Sudan Suderi.
Yes.
Yeah, they all claim not to know each other. Maybe met him once at a mosque. That's basically what their story was. We then later, after those depositions, were able to get from Scotland Yard the Bayumi video, and we're going to go through some of that. But I'm not playing the entire video. There's a couple of slides from the video that I think are important. But one of them that I didn't put up here that maybe I should have was the video at the beginning shows Bayumi, who loves to film everything, shows Sudan and Suderi were in Washington, D.C. with Bayumi while he was taking this video. They're on the video. So there's no question that they spent several days together in Washington, D.C. And this is in the summer of 1999, right about the time that al-Qaeda was identifying targets in the United States that would be hit about 18 months later.
So there's like 8 slides of clips from the video. We can maybe clip through each of them, and you can tell us what the point is.
Yeah, before I do that, the Saudi lawyers, Michael Kellogg and company, said this is just a tourist video. They wanted to try to explain yet another piece of substantial evidence. And this is anything but a tourist video, and you'll see why. And one of the things that Kellogg and his team ignored was the things that Bayumi was actually saying while he was narrating the video. So it wasn't just him walking around Washington, D.C. filming things. You know, normally if you took a tourist video, you would probably want to show it to your wife and kids or your friends or somebody like that. That's what people do sometimes if they're on vacation. That's not what this video is, and you'll see that in a moment. So here's one of a few slides I chose to display, and this is Bayumi walking towards the U.S. Capitol. He notes that's where the American Congress sits. Go to the next one. So he says here, I will get over and I will report in detail what is there. Report? Who's he supposed to be reporting to? You wouldn't call this thing a report if you were going to show this to family and friends. He's actually assigned to do a casing video, a surveillance video, to gather information for someone else or a group of others.
And I think one of the other important things that we've noted also is that on the video you're going to see important landmarks. One of the most notable landmarks that you can see if you're coming in from the air, coming towards the Capitol, is you would see this particular monument here. Which is easy to spot and easy to navigate. And one of the things that's important about the video is it does show different landmarks in the vicinity of the Capitol. Is that right, Duke?
Yeah, so he notes that the airport's over there, a plane flies over in the video, and what he's doing is basically, I think, trying to display where the Capitol is in relation to the Washington Mall. Most of you have probably been there. You see it's a long, essentially approach path for an airplane. It's easy to find the Capitol once you find other items like the Washington Monument and the Washington Mall. So here's Bayumi as he's getting closer to the Capitol, and he says this that's very disturbing. He says it in Arabic. They say our kids are demons. However, these are the demons of the White House, pointing to the Capitol, which is where the U.S. Congress is. He commented just before this that there are 500 members, decision makers for the American government in that building, and he's calling them the demons of the White House, obviously showing antipathy towards the federal government in the United States. Then he makes another statement right after that, and he says, in front of Congress, there is no power nor strength except through Allah, which is exactly what Osama bin Laden had been saying. Which is exactly what is al-Qaeda's mantra. He then gets closer. This is the pool just below the Capitol steps on the backside. I will provide you with the results soon. He is essentially reporting to somebody about all the details about the Capitol. Next slide. These are the cars that members of Congress take. They're parked behind the security area. He notes in the video that these are their cars. You said that in the plan. What plan is he talking about? Not a tourist video. He's talking about a plan. Somebody tasked him with this surveillance video so that he could send it back to members of Al-Qaeda. He wants to make sure he's getting full credit. He identifies himself in front of the Capitol building. And then I think the next line, he signs off, "Oh, beloved esteemed brothers." Who are the esteemed brothers? Members of Al-Qaeda. So Judge Daniels, again, some of the evidence, some of the things that I've just told you about the video, Judge Daniels decided he was going to essentially remain neutral on because there were so many other pieces of evidence that were undisputed, even though I don't think there's a big dispute about the Capitol casing video. Kellogg claims it's a tourist video. And so Judge Daniels just put that aside and said there's other really important evidence here. So again, this puts Bayoumi, the same person, in the middle of all of this. And then the judge went through some of the details. Some of this actually was known for a long time in the 9/11 Commission report, that he assisted the hijackers with getting them housing, not anywhere, but in an apartment right next door to where Bayoumi lived. He helped them open a bank account. He fronted them with cash as a down payment, a deposit to get that apartment, because they came with cash, which I should note is just under $10,000. They deposited that day in the bank. If you know about some of the banking laws, once you deposit $10,000 in cash, there's a CTR requirement where they have to report that because of money laundering, drug trafficking. It's basically usually a sign of something bad is happening when somebody's depositing cash in that amount. They apparently knew that and deposited $9,500 just under the reporting requirement. Bayoumi took him to that bank to do that. He then co-signed the leases for their apartment. These are people he told the 9/11 Commission he just met, and he was acting as a good Islamic, good Samaritan. But when asked about who else he might have helped in this fashion, he couldn't come up with a single example of anybody else that he ever helped like this, either before or after Hazmi and Mirar.
So, one of the last pieces of evidence to discuss is an airplane sketch that was mentioned earlier. And Duke, can you tell us what the sketch shows? And I think we have an image of the sketch here.
Yeah. So the judge, this is one of the pieces of evidence the judge was really disturbed by. I think we all were when we first saw it. If you can put up the slide of the, this was seized from Bayoumi's apartment a week, 10 days after 9/11 in the UK. The British police got it. They turned it over to the FBI. The FBI did not give us this for many, many years. They only gave it to us when they found out we were going to get it from the British. Can
you tell us where it was found?
It was found in Bayoumi's apartment. It was in his storage. This is Bayoumi's handwriting. We did have this when we took his deposition remotely. He was in Saudi Arabia, and he admitted this was his handwriting. And he was asked, why did you write this? What does it mean? He couldn't explain it. He says, I don't know. It's just a formula. I was just doing it for fun. But he drew an airplane here. It says the height of the plane from the Earth in miles, and the graph down below shows distance of the plane from an horizon. And he does some calculations. And we showed this to some pilot experts. And this is a very rudimentary way that you can navigate visually to find targets on the ground by knowing your height, how far you could see to the horizon, which would be the ground where buildings were. So this was really alarming. Unfortunately, the FBI either intentionally or accidentally secreted this. They had it by October of 2001. There's no reports about it anywhere. It was never given to the 9/11 Commission. The Commission didn't know about it. We found out about it in our litigation when it was uncovered.
So when Bayoumi was asked in his deposition, you did say that he didn't have an answer for it, but the Saudi lawyers came up with an answer that it was maybe something that had helped his son with in homework. Do you know where that came up? That was a creation out of thin air by the Kellogg firm. The lawyers, in their brief and in the oral argument, they actually tried to come up with an excuse. So maybe Bayoumi's son needed some help with algebra. Bayoumi's son was living in San Diego, and Bayoumi was over in Birmingham, England.
And the judge asked the Kellogg lawyers, well, did he say that at his deposition? No. Well, so it was obviously attorney argument that they struggled to come up with some kind of explanation. They were also asked, what did Bayumi mean by demons of the White House and in Congress? And their lawyers could only say that was just an unfortunate turn of phrase. They couldn't explain that either. There were so many things they couldn't explain. I'm being told to hurry up because we're running short on time, but what do we got here?
So at the end of the day, the court denied the kingdom's attempt to get out of the case. And I want you to tell us what you saw in the decision on the point of them trying to get out of the case.
So technically, in the conclusion for the court, all the court had to do is find enough evidence to deny the motion and to say we've convinced the court that there's a reasonable basis to believe that Thumeri and Bayumi were employed by the Saudi government to help the hijackers to pull off the 9/11 attacks. But as you just saw from some of the evidence and some of the quotes from George Daniels, he went much further than that. And keep in mind, we do not get a jury trial in this case. You don't get a jury trial when the defendant is a state sovereign. So Saudi Arabia is entitled to a bench trial, and the finder of fact at a bench trial is the judge. And who is the judge, at least for now? George Daniels. And what did he say about the evidence that he's seen so far? Pretty compelling, powerful stuff. That's why I thought it was important for you to see some of the quotes that the judge actually used to describe the evidence that we presented in this case so far.
There's also one additional one on page 43 that where the judge says multiple pieces of circumstantial evidence create the reasonable inference that Bayumi and Thumeri were coordinating with the Saudi government when providing assistance to the hijackers. I think that's...
Yeah, so there's direct and indirect and circumstantial evidence. I should tell you that circumstantial evidence is often just as powerful as direct evidence and can put somebody in prison. So a lot of people on TV say, oh, it's a circumstantial case. Well, if there's enough circumstantial evidence, that alone can be enough to convict. So circumstantial evidence is basically drawing inferences, reasonable conclusions from the evidence that you see in front of it. So that's what the judge is saying.
The important word in the phrase is evidence.
Absolutely.
So, and then this is, I think, the last slide that we have.
Yeah, so as I think as we were discussing the evidence, I told you a little bit about what some of the Saudi lawyers have been saying. They tried to explain away time after time, coincidence, or that's innocent, or you don't know what they said on the phone calls, all the typical stuff that a criminal defense lawyer might tell the jury. It's we don't know, or it's circumstantial, but each time they tried to do that, they were contradicted by the actual evidence, the undisputed evidence, and at times where it was disputed, they really had no good explanation, and that's what the court found. Some of the testimony and the documents contradicted their own employees when they testified at depositions.
So I think the final say here from the court is that the plaintiffs are allowed to prove their case at trial. We now have the opportunity to number one, take a victory lap first, and then roll up our sleeves because we still need to prove the case at trial. Yeah,
the victory lap's going to be short-lived. The Saudis have already filed the notice of appeal yesterday. I think tomorrow they're planning on asking the court to stay any further discovery because we are now entitled to get more discovery. We call it merits discovery, so we can move into additional areas. That'll be up to the judge to decide, or the Court of Appeals, whether or not discovery is stayed. We think there are very, very strong arguments why it should not be stayed, even if the appeal is pending, that we should continue to investigate, continue to uncover facts. I should tell you, in the last 13 months, we've uncovered more facts that are not even addressed by the court here because it hasn't been presented to the court. So we're continuing to do our work, and we're going to continue to, even if there's a stay, we're going to ask that discovery not be stayed with respect to the FBI or the CIA. So there's a lot of work to be done, but I think this is a huge milestone, a huge turning point in the case for all of us.
Yeah, I think the mechanics of where we are right now is that they filed their notice of appeal last night, and they're entitled as a sovereign to file their notice of appeal, even though it's interlocutory. They're entitled to take it up now. What they're not entitled to automatically is a stay of the discovery. And so the court has previously, in the past, after the decision came down, the court came back and said, give us proposals on how we're going to proceed with discovery. So the court recognizes that the default is discovery goes forward. The kingdom has indicated that it anticipates filing a request to stay that discovery, and we've indicated back to them we don't buy it. We think that 24 years has gone by, and we don't want another day to go by with memories fading, with documents going missing, and more importantly, perhaps, more people who are passing away and not getting their day in court. There's good reasons why discovery should not be stayed, and we'll make those arguments to the court. Unfortunately, since our time was up some time ago, we don't have any more time for questions answered, but I think, as in the past, Duke and I think you're available, and Darius, I think you're available if people have some questions for us out in the hallway afterward. Thank you again. Thank you, Frank, and thank you, Voices.